I'm recording my homily for Christmas Day 2018. And obviously, I'm sitting here next to the nativity scene. And you know the history, right? St. Francis of Assisi was the first one really to envision the idea of creating this nativity scene for people to see. And I think his desire was that it would enable us to enter into the reality of this moment, to be able to see the power and the beauty of this moment as strange as it may be, right? Now, St. Francis of Assisi, I mean, there is no other saint in the world that lived this, right? He understood the beauty of this, and so he lived it. There's no other religious order in the world where he would tell his brothers, we're not going to have a home, right? They're here because they had no home. And it's giving up the home for the sake of the other. And so they would travel, they would sleep under porches at churches, or they would sleep in barns, right? Just like this. But it was all to proclaim the good news with great joy, right? Just like the angel says to the shepherds, he says, and the shepherds are out in the fields tending their flocks at night, right? And he says to the shepherds in the gospel, he says, go proclaim the good news with great joy. Or actually he said, I bring the good news with great joy. But it's implied that we carry it forward. So St. Francis was the one who did that. So he helps us to see the beauty of this moment. Now, in this moment, you remember when you were a teenager and perhaps you're having doubts about the faith, right? Maybe not doubts, maybe that's too strong of a word, but maybe you had questions and maybe there just wasn't people to answer those questions. And so the questions would linger, right? And the questions eventually became poisonous to us wanting to live the faith because of those questions that were there. Maybe it was because you took a class in high school on the different world religions or something like that. And you're like, oh my goodness, there's 30,000 different religions in the world, or there's more than that. But, who's to say that what I believe is correct? Well, this, in some ways, shows us what's correct. Because no human being would create a religion that teaches this, right? That the Son of God, that God Himself, would come down from heaven to earth in this way, right? But as we enter into it, we realize that the uniqueness of our faith, and no other faith in the world, so the only two faiths, if you will, that God created was the Jewish faith, the covenants, leading to our Catholic faith in the New Covenant, right? No other religion in the world would teach that God came in such humble circumstances. But I want to talk about 4 ways that those humble circumstances are meant to be lived out each and every day in the context of the family, right? In the context of this family. Now, this is a whole family, because even the shepherd's part of the family, right? If we think about our faith that way, even the animals, in a sense, because, in our lives we have people, sorry, I'm not comparing people, animals to people, or people animals, but these animals are there. They're there, right? Maybe their participation is not as full as it could be if they were people. But we have people in our lives who are participating perhaps at the level of the animals. We kind of see it, but maybe they don't totally get it. But they're there, right? And then you've got everybody else, people walking by maybe, people who don't care, people who didn't let them stay in their inn, whatever it may be. Our whole world is full of all of these examples. So I want to talk about these 4 ways that we can help make this accessible to people so they can be close to Jesus Christ. Well, the 4 ways are very simple. The 4 things are very simple. I talked about them last week. They were the 4 virtues that we see symbolized through the season of Lent, right? So in the first week of Lent, we have the virtue of hope. Now, do you see any hope here? Yeah. In some ways, it's all they have in this moment is hope, right? Because God chose to come into these very humble circumstances so that it would point to a hope. It would point to something more. So that when in your life and when in my life things are not going well and we're kind of in the barn or in the doghouse, if you will. Now, guys, think about St. Joseph in this moment, right? He's the husband of Mary. His wife is giving birth in a barn. If your wife had to give birth in a barn because of something that you had done, right? Joseph had to enroll himself, right? They had to travel to Bethlehem. If your wife had to give birth to your baby in a barn because something you had done, you would be in the doghouse. I mean, you would be in the doghouse a long time, right? So Joseph has nothing in this moment but hope. That's all he can offer them in this moment, is hope. Now, what is hope? Hope is not, it's got to get better because it can't get any worse. That's not necessarily hope. Hope is being close to God and knowing that God will remain close to you. That is hope. It's looking to the future and knowing that God is at work and that God will always be at work. Okay? So they have hope, right? So that's the first, is hope. The second is peace. I think one of the beautiful things about the nativity scene is this moment is that it is peaceful. Now we know it's on the horizon. We know King Herod's on the horizon. We know that there's moments on the horizon that are going to be very difficult for this Holy Family. But in this moment, there is peace. You kind of see it again. You see it in the animals. You see it in the people who are coming just to adore, just to praise God, just to adore. You come into the church when it's all quiet, kind of like now. And you can just sit with Jesus and just adore Him. Those are precious moments. We need that in our life, right? When we get stressed out, it destroys peace. Right? Destroys our peace. We need this quiet time. The cross, which you can't see at this moment, is a magnificent moment also in Jesus' life, very humble also. But it can also be very intimidating, because even for the experienced Christian, it is hard to follow that path. But to begin the path, to be here, is perhaps a little less intimidating. That's the second piece. The third is joy, right? Joy. Is there any joy here? Well, yes. It's kind of rooted in the hope that in the future there'll be more, I guess. There's joy, but you have to look deeper. You have to look deeper at what they considered to be joyful. What would give them joy, right? But yes, there's joy. Children have this great ability to bring joy when maybe there is no joy, right? So I had brought the children up here at the kids' mess, and they helped me with the blessing, right? And I asked them a couple questions, and so I said, if you could do anything to make Jesus, Mary, and Joseph feel just more secure, more, I don't say comfortable, that's not really the word I'm looking for, but just more secure, what would you do? And they had all kinds of good answers. One little boy, he said, well, I'd build them walls, a roof, windows, door, and siding, right? Future carpenter, future construction worker. What was he getting at? Well, children know that the home is a place of security, right? Now, when I continued to ask the kids questions, I said, well, what would you do if you were there? And it didn't take long for them to say, well, we would play games, right? Now, when you come to Mass with your kids and you sit in the pew, you practically have to handcuff them, right? The kids, for like the next hour, you're going to behave, right? And it's really hard for kids sitting in the pew, little kids, to just sit still for an hour, especially if they can't see over the adults and they can't see what's going on at Mass and they can't participate. It's really hard for them. But you have a moment like this where you could imagine kids, maybe off in the distance a little bit, but you could imagine kids playing, right? kids playing tells us a lot. It tells us how they feel about their parents, about their situation. And so even if parents are really struggling, so you've ever seen photos or even video of refugees where they're in a refugee camp and the parents, it's just written on their face. They're just, it's just horrible, right? They don't have a home. They can relate. Mary and Joseph as refugees in a sense, right? But children could be out playing soccer with a can. But what it speaks of is how they feel secure because their parents are right there, right? And so children, you could imagine them playing here. And children, when they're playing, they help all of us. They help bring all of our anxieties and everything back down. They help remind us of what's most important. When we overcomplicate our lives, we get ourselves in debt, we get ourselves anxious, we're in a job we don't like, we're not doing what we should be doing, we're not living in the state of grace, whatever it may be. And it's kind of that innocence in children that brings us back to this. And so even Jesus as a child, and that's the power of God coming as a child, is he can bring us back to that innocence, that joy, the things that are simple that bring us joy when God is at the center, right? When God is right here at the center. Okay, and then the last one is love. So you had hope, peace, joy, and love. And love goes without saying. I've talked a lot about love before. I don't need to go into it a whole lot, but love goes without saying that love is the tie that binds, right? Now, what I want to do is I want to go into these just a little bit deeper in the sense for us as adults. So, for example, as adults, we want to go through life with experience because experience enables us to be good, right? To be better, to be great. So when the angel came to the shepherds and says, I proclaim to you good news with great joy, to me it implies that these shepherds, as well as Mary and Joseph, they're going to grow in experience. They're going to become good at it. What are they going to become good at? They're going to become good at hope, at peace, at joy, at love. They're going to become good at bringing these things into the world. And so when there is no hope, you and I as Christians, we're going to become experienced in bringing those things. It'll be our profession, if you will. We'll be professionals at it. We are professional hopers. It's not a real word. We're professional. We bring hope into the world. We construct hope. That's what we do. I have a friend, he was my maintenance man in another assignment, and he was much more than a maintenance man. I use that term knowing that he was very humble, and that he would never necessarily want to be understood as anything more than that. But he was more than that. He is more than that, right? I would tease him by calling him Saint Joseph, because he was an incredible carpenter, a professional carpenter. But also he was just an incredible man of faith. And his faith was very simple. He reminded me a lot of St. Joseph. You know, St. Joseph didn't really say a whole lot, but as we say, sometimes our actions speak louder than our words, right? But every once in a while, maintenance man, he would correct me on things, and it was usually when I was overcomplicating things. It usually was when something was more simple than I was making it out to be, and I just needed to be reminded of that. It's a very simple faith, right? Not to overcomplicate things. But the other thing he would do is he would tease me. So I love building things. I love working on things. In the rectory, I would build things. I love working with my hands. I do. However, I would always wear gloves. I don't know why. I guess I would just always wear gloves. I felt maybe I was tougher that way. I don't know. I could treat my hands, I could use my hands more if I was wearing gloves. Well, he would tease me that I always had priest hands. So what are priest hands? Well, that's an expression that we use when somebody's hands are very dainty, right? There's no calluses, there's no roughness about the hands. Why? Because priests, they don't do any work. They don't do any work with their hands, right? So you say priest hands, it means you have kind of dainty hands. So you'd say, Father, you got priest hands. Come on, take those gloves off. You need some calluses, right? Well, I was always greatly insulted by that because I do love working. But when I look at his hands, I mean, they're full of calluses, right? Gnarled, kind of ugly. But they were hands that spoke of experience. So even those ugly hands, those hands that were workers' man's hands, right? They were used to build beautiful things. Now, we would often joke because it seemed like every project he worked on, he would leave some blood. He was always bleeding, right? Because he didn't wear any gloves. I should get him a pair of gloves for Christmas. But anyways, he would always leave a little blood somewhere because it was almost like he would sacrifice his hands for the sake of the project, for the sake of what he was building, because he was making something beautiful for someone else, usually. But it was the experience. He knew what he was doing. He was proficient at it. He was a professional at it, right? And I say that of his carpentry, but also of his faith. And so to become a person of experience, you know, when you call 911, when you call the police, right, it's usually because things aren't going right. There's some desperate situation where we need help. We can't solve the problem on our own, right? So we call the police and the police come. And the police have experience. They're professionals. And so they enter into this desperate situation and they know what to do. They know who to call. They know if they need to call the paramedics, if the firemen, whatever it is. They know what to do. They have experience. And so should we be that way as Christians. When there's no hope in a situation, we know how to bring hope. Why? Because we've studied it. We've lived it. We've gained experience. We've spent time with Jesus Christ. We have His grace working in our hearts because we're living the faith fully. And so we can bring hope. That we can be people of peace. Because we have experienced peace, that we can bring peace. We know how peace operates. We know what helps bring peace and what hinders bring peace. And we all have people in our lives, sometimes it's even ourselves, when we're not bringing peace. And so that we should become experienced at it, good at it, right? That's the good news. If you think, what's the good news? You say, well, faith, hope, whatever the virtues are, faith, hope, charity, hope, peace, love, joy, whatever we're talking about, they can be very abstract. They can be way out there and they say, yeah, I'll pray for that. No. Yes, we pray for it, but Jesus wants us to live it. He wants us to be good at it. That's the good news. Then joy, to be good at bringing joy, right? So when there's no joy, we know how to bring joy. And I don't mean, we bring balloons and banners when somebody's down. I don't necessarily mean that. I mean, well, it could be that, but I don't necessarily mean that. But I mean, we know how to bring that deeper joy, that we're living exactly the way we should be living. That's what brings joy. And then love, as I said, it goes without saying. We bring love, right? There was this dad in this other parish I had. He's this great big guy. But after Mass, I would see him, and he was often carrying his little baby boy. But he'd carry him like a football, right? He'd carry him like a football. And so his son was facing like Superman style, facing down, right? But he'd be carrying him like a football. And it drove his wife crazy. But I would sometimes comment, I'd say, I like the way you carry your kid, right? He's like a football. But the thing was, he carried him that way because he had experience as a dad, right? It's like a dad when they're throwing their child up in the air, right? It might make everybody else nervous. But there's a couple things happening in that moment. One, the dad has experience. A dad with no experience, how do they carry their child? They're all stiff, right? It's like they don't want to drop Junior. But a dad with experience can be careful at the same time as, doing joy. So what happens when the dad's throwing their kid up in the air? The kid is laughing and giggling, and there's great joy. But there's also a profound relationship that's formed. There's confidence that child is learning in that moment, that I can trust dad. Dad will catch me, right? And not just when he throws me up in the air, but when I'm a teenager and I made a mistake. Dad will be there, right? Dad's not going to leave me. Love, right? Experience, it comes from experience. And so one of the things, and I feel like there's a series of homilies coming on here, maybe not, but just to talk about how we grow in that experience. What are the qualities that we can grow in so that we become proficient and professionals at living the good news with great joy? All right, Merry Christmas, and I'll see you in a while. I'll see you next year. All right, God bless.